way you carry your wealth and then the use you make of it that is important. Of course, people are going to be envious of a country that has many of the things they can't possibly have. But if they believe genuinely that you are interested in their problems and willing to help, and are offering help in a way which does not hurt their dignity, I don't think you find the kind of bitterness that you will find if in some way you have offended them.
In this series of heritage programs, we are privileged to meet Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt and her guests, Dr. Clarence Kramer, Dean of Adelbert College, Western Reserve University, and Mr. Henry Morgenthau III. In this third program, we visit with Mrs. Roosevelt to hear of her life beyond the White House.
Mrs. Roosevelt, after the White House years, I can't say that you ever had a really private life because you've always continued to be so much in the public eye. But I noticed that you did divest yourself of all of the trappings and all of the necessary pomp of public life. Was this a conscious transition on your part?
No, I don't think so. I think it was a perfectly natural transition. I had always disliked much of the public side, and I'd always kept a certain amount of, I always had kept a little apartment in New York, and where I had one maid, and I'd always been sort of feeling that that was the way I probably would live again, so I'd better get accustomed to it, and I tried to stay accustomed to it.
But you did, of course, immediately turn the house, the big house at Hyde Park, over to the government, even though you could have kept it for life.
Yes, we could have, but my husband left me a private note in which Franklin said that he would hate to see us searching for privacy, and that he felt that it would be wise if the children, if I could get the children to agree, to turn it over to the government as soon as possible. That he had had experience with the other homes of presidents, and their families were always asking him to take them over, and that he felt it would be very difficult to live there. And the other children agreed, because many of them had their own homes, and so we did it as quickly as, just a year after he died, I turned it over. But getting it emptied out was a terrific job, terrible job.
I know one of the problems that you had was making a new home for Fowler, because I think the readjustment was more difficult for him.
Oh, Fowler had a hard time. He was accustomed only to life with his master as a very important person. And also, Scotties are very one-man dogs. And when he had to find that I was the only one, he put up with me. But he never really got accustomed to me. And after I lived in the cottage, he would always lie where he had had to lie when Franklin was alive. That is to say, in the doorway, between the living room and the dining room, where he could see both exits, the exit through the hall and the exit out through the living room. And he'd always lain there, because when Franklin decided to go, he would decide to go very fast, and Fowler must always be ready to go and get up in the same seat beside him as quickly as possible. And he lay there always. That was the place he lay, in that door. Well, for the longest time after Franklin died, evidently always looking for Franklin's return. And once I took him over to the big house when General Eisenhower was just back and had asked to come and lay a wreath, and he and Mrs. Eisenhower and his son came. And I took Fowler over, and when we opened the gates, particularly that day, which I never opened, so he came in the old way, down the driveway, and the sirens, of course, and the motor cars, the motor police were there, and Fowler stood rigid with his ears up. This was what he'd been waiting for. This was what he expected. And it was the greatest disappointment to him when his master didn't appear. And he just was as dejected as he could be. And I think he never really accepted anybody else. He just went ahead tolerantly with me until he died.
Mrs. Roosevelt, until your appointment to the United Nations, I believe that you had always acted in an advisory capacity. Was the assumption of your official duties a somewhat difficult transition to make?
Well, as a matter of fact, I never felt I was in an advisory capacity. I had gone ahead and done lecture trips twice a year, autumn and spring, to find out what was going on, really, purely on my own. Franklin was always glad to hear, because it was another source of information. But he had plenty of sources. And I had enjoyed doing that. I came to know the country very well and the people, and I enjoyed that already. And when I was asked to go to the United Nations, my first instinct was to refuse, because I couldn't possibly know enough to go. And then my son Elliot and my secretary, Miss Thompson, who'd been with me over 30 years, both insisted that I should do this. And I thought it over very carefully and decided, well, I would do my best. And so I accepted. And that's how I came to go. And I don't think I really thought so much about what responsibilities I was accepting, except for the fact that I knew I would have to do the very best I could, because I was the only woman on the delegation, and it would be letting all women who might in the future have this opportunity down. If I didn't do well, it would be a wonderful excuse for them always to say, well, no woman can do this work. I did feel that responsibility very much, but it never, I don't think it occurred to me very much that I was suddenly carrying responsibilities of another nature, of a more important political and international nature, because I counted so much on my advisors and on the people around me, and after all, you were doing what your government told you. At first, I would never have thought of disagreeing with my government. It took me several sessions before it occurred to me that if I didn't think the same, I might tell the State Department. And I was quite old in the service before I really ever tried to change a policy the State Department had made. And that time I succeeded. But that was entirely at first it was unthinkable. I would never have dreamt that that was what you did.
On this, of course, I think that the thing that you did the most work on, was perhaps most important to you, was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Do you feel that this declaration, as a declaration, is having an effect in the world?
Yes, it's had more legal value than I ever thought it would have. It was meant, of course, to be of no legal binding value whatsoever, and in itself it has no legal binding value. It's purely a declaration and a putting down on paper of the aspirations and hopes of peoples all over the world. And this was the first time that had ever been tried. But it has now, in many cases, become important legally because it's been incorporated in new constitutions, not as a whole, but certain articles out of it. So you find certain articles in the Constitution of India, in the Constitution of Japan, which we wrote for Japan, and in other countries, so that the minute it goes into a constitution, it becomes legally binding. And in that way, and from the mere fact that peoples all over the world began to know that there was such a thing as human rights to which they were entitled, I think it had a great moral value in the world.
Do you think, Mrs. Roosevelt, that the picture which much of the rest of the world has of the United States as a country of great wealth has tended to weaken our prestige and our position in the eyes of the rest of the world?
No, I don't think that it's the possession of great wealth. It's how you use that wealth, and it's how you carry it. If you arrive in a country and give the impression that everything you see can only be compared with something better in the United States, people are going to become irritated. There's no question about that, no matter where you are. And that's a tactless approach. And if you go into a country and behave as though owning large automobiles and a number of bathtubs is the only important thing in the world, well, they're going to become irritated again, because there are very few countries that can own a large number of bathtubs in every house and large automobiles. And it's the way you carry your wealth and then the use you make of it that is important. Of course, people are going to be envious of a country that has many of the things they can't possibly have. But if they believe genuinely that you are interested in their problems and willing to help, and are offering help in a way which does not hurt their dignity, I don't think you find the kind of bitterness that you will find if in some way you have offended them.
In the sphere of human rights, which we mentioned a minute ago, I would assume that the attitude taken by the late Senator McCarthy on this whole question certainly did not help our prestige or reputation abroad.
Well, strangely enough, Senator McCarthy became known all over the world. One would be asked about him with wonder in the most unheard of places. And they would say, is this really true? And you would be obliged to say, yes, that is what Senator McCarthy says, but we hope it will pass. He did us great harm in the world. And our acceptance of his doctrines for a time, though many of us here knew that the day would come when the people would reject them, we knew more about ourselves than the rest of the world knew. And they didn't know this, and they were just wondering what had happened to us.
Following Professor Kramer's question about McCarthy, another thing which has supposedly damaged our prestige abroad a great deal is the impression that the rest of the world has in regard to our handling of the Negro situation, particularly in the South. Has this been very damaging?
Well, the Little Rock incident did us a great deal of harm. But even before the Little Rock incident, the fact that, according to the ideas of many people, we were not moving to a complete equality among all our citizens in every way, did us harm, because we are now trying to win to the free world, the world where men are free to make their own decisions and shape their own lives, take part in their government and shape their government. We're trying to win to that side the uncommitted areas of the world. Now, those are largely in Asia, in Africa, and in South America. And most of those people are colored peoples. Now, that doesn't mean they're all Negro. They're colored peoples. And they're very sensitive, those of them who've gained their freedom. They want to be recognized as equals. And the suggestion that we do not consider our own citizens as equals makes them feel there is something really radically wrong in everything that we offer them. So they'll take a good look at what the communists offer. And sometimes the communists are rather clever in selling their side of the picture. And we have to remember that, because any incident over here which points out the lack of equality for every citizen in our country does us harm in our much greater problem of holding for the free world the greatest possible area of the world. Because if the communists win enough, there won't be enough free world left for the free world to function.
Well, what can we do about this? It's a big question.
Face it. and realized that we can't afford to have two kinds of citizens. We must have equal citizenship for anybody in our country.
Of late, Mrs. Roosevelt, there's been a lot of talk about re-evaluation of the American educational system, doubtless because of the influence of Sputnik. Some people have found a great deal to be admired in the Russian system, which could produce this technical advantage, or what seems like an advantage at the present time. Would you care to make some observations on Russian education?
Well, I think first of all we ought to realize that the Russians have done in their country what they had to do. They had an enormous job to do, and they began only 40 years ago. And education at that time, under the Tsars, only 10% of the people in the Soviet Union could read and write. And today, I suppose you would find difficulty in finding 10% who cannot read and write. But for us, who set up our ideals long, long ago, to suddenly turn around and want to copy the Russians, that seems to me ridiculous, because we had ideals. We haven't done as well by those ideals as we should do. We should take a good look at our education today in the light of our own ideals and change where we think it necessary. But don't let's copy the Russians.
You think we perhaps lack an enthusiasm for education here that the Russians have, because we do tend to take education, free education, all kinds of education, pretty much for granted here. The young people in this country think that that the country owes them an education, or their parents owe them an education.
I think that's one of our troubles. We do take education too much for granted. Now, the Russians have to take a test on their record. And I think it would be a bad idea to see how many of us really care about learning.
I know when you were in the United Nations, you began actually working, debating against Russians and working with Russians for the first time. Did you feel that you ever got to really know a Russian, to really talk informally?
No. I have no feeling that I ever actually reached a point of real friendly intimacy with a Russian. I did feel that I understood certain things, and since being there last year, I understand many more things which I had not understood before. But to really know a Russian is difficult because they are under so many restrictions. They cannot talk freely.
Coming back to Russian education again, I believe that there is little emphasis in Russia on the humanities, on the social studies, in the sense that we place emphasis on fearless investigation of the humanities and the social studies in a liberal arts education in this country. Now, there are some people now who are perturbed in the United States because of what they think is an overemphasis at the present time on science as against the humanities and the social studies in developing the broadly educated man or woman. Would you care to comment on that in the light of what you know about Russian
Well,
education?
I would not say that the humanities were as much studied. I think one reason for that is because that requires more freedom than they want the average person to have. But they certainly are not laying less emphasis on educational values in a knowledge of history or literature. They lay great emphasis on knowledge of certain types of literature. Now, they censor They don't let you read anything. And I think some of us would be awfully surprised at the authors that they consider the best for the United States. But they do make people read a great deal. And I would probably think that it was not as important as technical things, because these have a value in what the Soviet leaders feel are the important things to achieve today.
There are many people who are quite critical of the UN, as there were many who were very critical of the League of Nations in its day. Would you care to comment on the future of international organizations of the UN or League type?
Well, I feel very strongly that we should do everything we possibly can to make the UN work. It's the first machinery that we have ever set up in combination with many other nations, now 82 other nations, which has really worked. And naturally, it only works as well as the member nations make it work, because they set the machinery up and they make it work. But particularly the leaders, the big nations, count in making it work well. But it's the only channels we have through which to work for peace and for better understanding. And all the setup of specialized agencies which work every day, all the year round, were designed to bring about better understanding and to prove that when you sent people out to work together of different nationalities and different religions, they accomplished something. And that's being done every day, every year, all over the world. Here, we don't see the results so much because we don't have to ask for any help. We're too rich. But the rest of the world, you ask a rice grower in Burma what the United Nations means to him, and he'll answer food and agriculture, because it was the specialized agency of food and agriculture that gave him new ways of cultivating rice, new rice plants, better rice plants, and doubled his crop. Well, that means a very tangible good in his everyday life. And that is happening one way or another. World Health has brought to Java, for instance, a new world, because my first time there, malaria was rampant. 3 years later, when I went there, malaria had been completely wiped out by the World Health Organization. They were being given technical assistance to develop their natural resources, and people could do a good day's work, and they never had been able to before. Quite aside from the numbers that died from malaria, there were a far greater number that couldn't work at all. This is an enormous value in the lives of human beings. And I think we should try very hard to make this work.
During your frequent visits around the world, you've met and seen at work many of the leaders of the world. Who would you say are the particularly important world leaders of today, and where are the areas where we can expect leadership from?
Well, as you know, Henry, I hate naming people because you always get into trouble. But in the Asiatic area of the world, I would say that Nehru stood out. In the first place, India is the only free country that approximates the size of China, and communist China has gone to the communists. So if India is going to stay with the free areas of the world, we have to rely on the leader there, who is the great leader, and that's Nehru. Now, interestingly enough, Nehru is being constantly visited by the heads or the leading men of all the countries round. I've been on planes over and over again with delegations from different countries, all of them going to see Nehru. And so I know quite well that they consult him, that they think highly of him, of his opinion. And so for that reason, I think he's important.
Who are some of the others?
Well, I think in Burma is quite an important person. Sukarno is an interesting man, not as much of a leader outside his own country, and of course at present it's there's civil war there, and one can't tell much. But I should think that in that area of the world, UNO and Nehru were the two really important leaders. Now, in other parts of the world, it's rather difficult to say. I don't think that anyone stands out very much in any of the South American countries as a particularly great leader, nor do I think that they do in the other areas. In the Near East, you can certainly look upon Ben-Gurion in Israel as having been a very tremendous leader. Nasser, you must consider a leader, though you may dislike him. I happen to dislike him, but you have there a more the type of a dictatorial person. If you're going in for dictators, certainly Tito of Yugoslavia is a leader. He's also a dictator. And Khrushchev is a leader. He's also a dictator. And you can find, I think they are personalities. Let's call them that.
What was your impression of Khrushchev when you met him recently?
Well, he's a person. I'd been told that he was a dreadful person, that I would find him terrible, that he was coarse and vulgar and drunk all the time. He was not drunk when I met him at Yalta. He'd had a month's vacation. He's of peasant stock. He's worked in a factory. He's very well educated, self-educated, and has a mind that is as quick and alert as anyone I've seen in a long time. I kept thinking who I would like to have opposite him in negotiations, and I decided that I couldn't think of very many, that I hoped it would be a team when it went out from this country, because that's a very resourceful man, and a man who may want to appear less intelligent than he is, but he's a man who is really very intelligent, and also with a tremendous drive, a dynamic force, which somehow, occasionally, I think we've lost.
We have been visiting with Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt and her guests, Dr. Clarence Kramer, Dean of Adelbert College, Western Reserve University, and Mr. Henry Morgenthau III. In Part 4 of this series, we shall visit again with Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt, Woman of Influence. The Heritage Series is a production of WQED, Pittsburgh. And from the minds of those who enter in, this gift is given, and this our heritage. This is National Educational Television.